Good morning. What an impressive stage. Even it's more impressive if you're up here on your own, but that will change in a couple of minutes. My name is Alfred Ledermann. I'm heading the product management teams for lending at UBS Switzerland, and I'm also the co-chair of our Center of Excellence for Sustainability, where we drive our sustainable lending initiatives here in Switzerland. The little video which you have just saw is a little appetizer for a UBS white paper of our UBS Sustainability and Impact Institute. And it was just released this morning at 7 a.m. And I will share with you all the details where you can find this white paper at the end of this session. So please stay with us and you will find all the details to the white paper. I've also brought with me a couple of key messages from the white paper, if we can show the first slide. We all know that buildings are key to decarbonize. And for me, the most striking yet very simple truth is what you see in the second bullet, that most of the buildings that we actually live in, work in, will be there in 2050. And we cannot afford to build everything from scratch. So in the end, what we need to do is we need to reduce the emissions from the existing buildings. And that's also what the white paper says. We must rethink, rebuild, and reimagine. Now, to get this session a bit going, I also want to engage you a bit more active. And what we have prepared is a little poll with you in the audience. And I'm sure you all know here the technology. We will use Mentimeter for one simple question. And I'll walk you through, again, how you access it. I guess you all have wireless access already on your smartphone. Then you go to menti.com or you simply scan the QR code. Then you need to type in the code, which you see here, 64563787. And then you find a simple question. What are your plans for retrofitting in your own property? And I think the really cool thing about buildings is we can all relate to it because we live in buildings, we work in buildings, etc. And some of you might rent or your own property. So I give you a couple of seconds to answer the question on Menti. And I see already the first people probably checking also their emails now. So it's time to welcome our panelists for this morning's sessions. And it's with great honor and also really proud to introduce a great panel of experts in their fields. And I want to start with Christoph Baumann. If I can ask you to come on stage. Christoph is the Deputy Head, Strategy Division and Envoy for Sustainable Finance at the State Secretariat for International Finance. Then I would ask Kirsten Henson to come on stage. Kirsten is the founding director of KLH Sustainability, a sustainable built environment consultancy based in London. She's also a technical advisor to Undivided Ventures and a lecturer at numerous universities, including the University of Cambridge. Then it's also a pleasure to have Niklas Nerik on stage. Niklas is the head of strategy and sustainability at Wincasa. Wincasa is a leading property service provider in Switzerland that covers the full life cycle of a property. And last but not least, welcome Gian Reto Apota on the stage. John is the founder and COO of Norm, a Swiss green fintech that offers a digital solution to identify the renovation potential in your building. He was also named the Business Angel of Switzerland in the year 2022, I'm sorry, John. So now with the panel on stage, I don't know if we can have the results of the Mentimeter. Okay, so we see the results, and I would ask actually now the panelists if we can have some initial reactions to the picture which we see here, and you can see here on the screen. Who will break the ice? You all find the mics on your chair.
I'm happy to start with the contribution. I think it's quite interesting to see the No I Am Renting. In the UK, we recently introduced the minimum energy efficiency standards. And so that's having an impact. We'll touch on that shortly, I think. But I think on the whole, we'd see this similar picture in the UK. Renters are unwilling to invest in properties. They don't necessarily see where the return on investment is, but there's obviously things that you can do that will pay back in 6 months, that will pay back in 1 year. And those, I think those that are looking at retrofitting, I would like to believe they are owners. We are probably the lucky, we are the fortunate, we are the 10% here that have the money to invest, that have the opportunity to invest. And I think one of the challenges that we actually really have is those that are living in poor quality homes that actually can't afford to heat their homes and put food on the table. Where is that investment coming from? As I say, I think we're the fortunate here.
Any other direct reactions?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't surprise me at all. Switzerland is a country of tenants. We have like 60% of the inhabitants that live as tenants, not in their own homes. And what's also interesting is the 8 persons here in the room that might renovate or retrofit their homes within the next 1 to 3 years. That gives a hint on the age of the building park in Switzerland, which is in large parts quite old and needs retrofitting.
And unfortunately, the 8 is smaller than the 11 on the right side. Huh?
But I mean, as an entrepreneur, I like the sequence. I would tackle the market from the left to the right. So you would start with the ones in the near term, and then the midterm, and until then, we need the solution for the big bar.
Yeah, maybe just to add, it's also, when I look at this big bar, I'm also interested to see what can renters do to kind of push their landlords to do some retrofitting.
So I think with that we can take down the results, and I would open the discussion. I think setting the scene, we all know the role of buildings in decarbonization. So just to drop a couple of numbers, what we see in the white paper, 37% of global emissions are coming from the building sector, whereof 28% are from existing buildings. And as I said, we cannot just tear down the existing buildings, but we need to retrofit. And I think in practice that means we need to talk about isolation, heating, and wherever possible also on-site energy generation. And Christoph, if I may open, given the importance of the building sector, where does this stand on the official agenda in Switzerland?
Thank you for this question. So I can answer that from a sustainable finance perspective. So there's a lot that the Ministry of Environment is doing that is kind of separate, also in the real estate business. But I think there's 3 essential parts in the area of sustainable finance dealing with real estate. One is certainly the climate and innovation law that the Swiss populace passed this summer with over 60%, or with almost 60%. There it has 3 aspects that are highly critical for the real estate sector. One is obviously the net zero making it mandatory for each and every corporation headquartered in Switzerland to be net zero. So that obviously covers the commercial real estate, their own building parks, to get them to net zero. And the second one is the subsidies that the Swiss government is rolling out to change the heating source in private real estate. It's up to 200 million over the next, annually over the next 10 years. That should really further accelerate the change in the heating source in many private real estate. And the third one, which is most relevant to me, is Article 9.1. The government needs to ensure that the financial flows of the market are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And obviously the financial flows include the mortgages that are given out, the loans that are given out. So that's something which is going to be very interesting in the future. How will the government comply with these obligations, and what obligations will there be, for what incentives or framework conditions will be there for the markets to further align. The second area, which is super important, is the Federal Registry for Buildings and Dwellings. I think there's a huge amount of work done currently, still a lot of work to be done, to make data on the energy efficiency and on the heating source of real estate in Switzerland available to the market and available to financial institutions to be used in their engagements with their clients. And there we're focusing very much on that there is also an API, so a way for banks to download all the data quickly, to access the data quickly and use them in their processes. And I think there we're really cutting edge when I look at it internationally. Now the problem with that is that the data is not yet always the latest quality. I know from my own building, the data is from 2016, so when I acquired the building. From my parents' building, it's from 2000, the last time there was a census in the entire market. So that's certainly not satisfactory, but there we're working together with the banks, but also with the cantons to improve the data quality. I think that's more difficult than you think in a federal system like Switzerland, where the mandates are not always on the federal level, but that's certainly a key priority I'll touch upon later as well. And the third area, just to be brief on that, is the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So these international alliances where financial institutions commit to net zero, to jointly find ways to incentivize their clients. And the Banking Alliance obviously deals with the banking book, so with, amongst others, with the mortgages. So I think there it's an exciting and important development for banks to coordinate and figure out best practices to incentivize the clients to change.
Maybe just to react on it, you mentioned banks, and you might have also seen our commitments there. We have an emission intensity commitment to reduce our emission intensities in our mortgage book until 2030 by more than 40%. And as you said, for us, the key levers there is to have that data. And as you said, now we call it the Gebäude- und Wohnungsregister, is really a key asset for us, because we can download this data, which might not yet be perfect, but at least we have a starting point to have a discussion with the client. And maybe with that discussion also the data will improve over time. But maybe, Kirsten, if you can also have a more international view, and the white paper says that in UK they introduced the minimum energy efficiency standard. What is it? How does it work? And is it really effective?
Well, it still exists. It's one of the policies that Sunak hasn't rescinded on. I do have a slide that sort of shows this idea. We have something called energy performance certificates in the UK. Every building that is newly built to get through the building regulations requires an energy performance certificate. It's done through modelling. We call it SBEM or SAP, Simplified Assessment Procedure, Simplified Building Assessment Methodology, which, again, it's the simplified bit that is giving us inconsistencies and errors in the results. And the point that I wanted to make here is that the energy performance certificates, you have to have one if you're going to rent a building, but as you can see from the image here, the energy performance certificate actually bears very little resemblance to the energy consumption of those buildings. So data is available, but potentially we are making decisions on the wrong data. At the moment, the minimum energy efficiency standards say that if you are in the bottom categories, you cannot rent that building. whether it's a non-residential or a residential building. So in terms of non-residential, to be honest, fit some LEDs. It'll get you up to the next category. So this isn't rocket science. It's not going to shift the needle massively at the moment. In theory, it will get more and more stringent. So in 2027, if you're a D-rated property, in 2030, etc., it will get more stringent in terms of what the EPC rating is. For me, I think one of the worrying thoughts around this is that residential landlords, rather than retrofit, will actually just dump their buildings. So they put the worst performing buildings back onto the market, which in theory will have a low value. Therefore, the lowest income part of society can finally afford a home, but it's a poorly affording home, but a poorly performing home in terms of energy performance standards. And for me, that's kind of a concern, because this is only to do with rental properties, landlords of non-residential and residential. I think far more interesting for me is not what the government is doing, but what actually the industry in the UK has been doing over the last 5 or 6 years. We have the Institute of British Architects that have put standards out there, requirements. We know what we're aiming for in terms of operational energy performance, in terms of embodied carbon performance, in terms of basic sort of well-being standards like daylighting, etc. We are committed to doing it as an industry. We've seen the Low Energy Transformation Initiative publish information in terms of how to retrofit, how to refurb, what good new build looks like. Is green hydrogen the way to go? Spoiler alert, the answer is no, not for buildings, it's idiotic. And now we're also seeing the institutions like the Institute of Structural Engineers and Civil Engineers get on board to really provide advice and direction for their members as to what they should be doing in terms of the energy crisis and the climate crisis.
So I think EPCs is a topic, John, which we will touch on later also in the panel. I think that's where also your solution is. But maybe before we go into the Swiss solution there, how do you see currently the Swiss fintech scene or the startup scene in that field? Where do we stand here?
Yeah, I think startups will play a quite important role in this transition. Sustainability in general, but especially in this field of retrofitting. Because if you look at the user journey, as we say in startup land, to get such a retrofit, it's still quite a mess, and there is a lot of information that is not there, and there are a lot of steps that are not digital, and there I think it's a huge opportunity for startups, like globally, but especially also in Switzerland, because there is not much yet, and I also think it's not a winner-takes-it-all game. So I think a lot of startups can be successful in this field, and that's why I really also encourage founders and startups to go into this field and build stuff. I also, if I look at the other side, at the VC and money financing side, it looks quite good for startups in this field. I would say the two hot fields at the moment are AI and sustainability. So if you're doing something in this field, you will get lots of emails of VCs asking you what you're doing and if they can talk to you. So I think it looks good, and my prediction would be that startups will play an important role here.
So I think with that, setting the scene, we would double-click a bit on what we just heard. And I think one of the key questions that was also answered in the UBS white paper was, are we moving fast enough? And I think it's not a spoiler if I say probably not. Numbers are still not where they should be. Let's not discuss the numbers now, but rather what can we do today and what might prevent that we are actually moving faster than we should. And Niklas, I want to open with you, given that you are also advising clients at Wincasa. Do you see more interest from your clients? Is there a pickup in questions on retrofitting, energy efficiency, etc.?
Yes, of course. I mean, as Wincasa, we are dealing mostly with institutional clients, so banks, insurance companies, real estate funds, and for them, the whole net zero topic, ESG topics, have become very, very important in recent years. Not only because of regulatory steps, but even more because of self-regulatory steps. And their demand for ESG-related services is very, very, very high. And so this field of services also has become an important field of services for us as Wincasa, and strategic field of services. And what customers ask us to do for them is starting with energy management, collecting data, consumption data, which is highly needed for everything else. CO2 reduction paths, object strategies, including retrofitting strategies, CapEx planning and OpEx planning, by the way, also very important. Yeah, and the whole CO2 reporting thing. Those are, mainly the things that we do for our customers.
And would you say everybody's moving, or just a selected number of
I would
people?
say at the moment it's the institutional owners that drive the market. The private owners of income-producing real estate, they are still a little reluctant investing in retrofittings. I think we have to discuss this further on today.
And maybe, Kirsten, from your experience, and I know you have been advising clients for many, many years, including, for example, the Olympic Committee. What are the levers that you can actually use already today?
I think, we're seeing a growing interest in the refurbishment and market, but that's rather driven by the discourse around embodied carbon and whole life carbon. We've had some quite high profile new build rejected in London on the basis of embodied carbon. So the Tulip was one absolutely idiotic building in terms of in terms of design in a climate crisis, but also the Marks and Spencer building has been refused planning permission to be knocked down to be rebuilt. And we're seeing more and more councils sort of put these planning requirements in place that say if you are going to knock down, it's not just because it's more operationally energy efficient, then it's okay if you new build. You have to prove and balance the embodied carbon associated with retrofit, refurb, new build, along with the operational carbon performance or the operational energy performance. So, that to me, we are talking about refurbishment a lot more than we used to. We love knocking down and building new. It's just easier to do it. One of the key, one of the key driving factors, and it was alluded to, is that there's a lot of people signed up to net zero, aligning their businesses with science-based targets initiative. And so they need to decarbonize their portfolio. And there is that real challenge between the embodied carbon to decarbonize and the operational carbon. And my feeling is that this is, if we're not aware of that 10% of global CO2 emissions associated with building products on our journey to decarbonize, we risk exploding our carbon budget in the next 5 years in our effort to decarbonize the building stock for the future. So it needs a really balanced approach, but I think the dialogue is certainly more engaging. The clients that I've been working with in the last 15 years are more ambitious, and it's not just carbon. They want to say, it's not just carbon. What about well-being? What about social mobility? What about being a good neighbor and a good owner of buildings? How do I create community and society and influence that? And to me, that's quite exciting when the dialogue is going beyond the carbon agenda as well.
When I can share maybe some experiences that we have made also, because we are piloting new products, new advisory services with our clients. And what we have seen is that obviously clients really want to engage in these discussions, but the role of banks is seen as very much in what is the return on my investment. So I think that is still a bit the perspective that we see out there, and maybe that is also where you would ask your banker what is the return on investment, rather than advise on obviously the windows or the isolation or the heating, which is also good for us, because obviously on isolation we would not be the perfect advisor there. But given also your discussions, you probably also understand best where are the barriers for moving faster. And I don't know, Niklas or Kirsten, if you want to comment also on the barrier side.
May I? Yeah, I think for investors it's still difficult to see the return on an investment. I mean, we have already in Switzerland like research projects. One of those is one of Wüstpartner, which is one of the big consulting companies here in Switzerland. And they think that green properties, as compared with brown properties, might be worth like 3 to 5% more. But we don't know it. We don't really know it yet. And this is something that makes investors, reluctant. They all want to reduce CO2, that's what they really want, and that's what drives them, that they promised to be net zero, some of them already in 2030, some in 2040, and that's what's driving them. That's why they are willing to invest too, but the return on investment in many cases is not so easy to quantify.
May I pick up on that? I think
sure.
One of the reasons that we find for return on investment is so challenging is something that we call the spark gap. And that's the differential pricing between gas and electricity. So we know that we need to move away from fossil fuel heating systems, hot water systems. That's a given. We have electric solutions for that, air source heat pumps. They are rolled out across Europe. They work incredibly well. We're a little bit challenged in the UK. Apparently we're technology phobics. But the spark gap is the barrier. An air source heat pump will offer 3 times more heat than the power it consumes. Your gas boiler will give you a 1-to-1 ratio. So in terms of the operational energy performance, it's almost a non-brainer, except when electricity costs you 4 times the price, 5 times the price per kilowatt hour as a kilowatt hour of gas. And that's where it is in the UK. We've got one of the largest spark gaps. If I take an example in Holland, we just recently completed the Innocent blender, the fruit guy, the guys that do the fruit juices. And the spark gap is much, much lower in Holland than it is in the UK. And actually what that enabled us to do was introduce all electric solutions for hugely energy and power intensive industries like food production in a cost-effective, and we were able to demonstrate with the supply chain that the payback on investment for an all-electric solution was probably about 4 to 6 years. Now, we did also add in a risk of carbon taxation because people are concerned. We already tax the high polluters in terms of concrete production, cement production, steel production, and those high energy users are concerned that carbon taxation is coming. So that does need to go into any CapEx and OpEx financial analysis. The other area that I think really drove innovation was the fact that there's tax subsidies available in Netherlands as well. And for the Innocent blender, we may have spent 10% more to make it a truly green all-electric building, but actually the tax subsidies available from the Netherlands government basically paid that upfront capital costs as well. So we need to see the sort of multifaceted consideration of OpEx, CapEx. We need to see governments driving and pushing investment in the right direction to move us towards all-electric solutions. The other big barrier that we have in the UK, and I'm not quite sure how it is across Europe, is VAT, so our value-added tax. Would you believe, I don't know whether you guys know this, but your jaws will drop. If my home or my building has been occupied in the last 2 years and I want to refurbish it, I have to pay 20% VAT on that refurbishment. If I want to knock it down and build new, I pay 0% VAT on my new build. So we have a really bizarre, perverse incentive in the UK, financial incentive, that needs to be corrected. And I think this idea of using taxation to really sort of drive innovation, whether in new build or indeed in refurbishment, is absolutely essential. It's a barrier that we need to address.
So maybe before we go into the topic of innovation, I think you also gave a perfect segue to you, Christoph. Where do you see the role of policies in knocking down some of these barriers?
Well, for the next part, I hope that there's lots of cantonal banks in the room. So I want to come back to this federal registry on buildings and dwellings, because it's really phenomenal. So my mind was blown when I can go on a website, I can enter any address in Switzerland, and I can see the energy efficiency and the heating source of that house in a very easy way. I can make comparisons across the entire market, across the entire region. So the potential of this is so immense, and the importance for it for financial institutions. Yet the problem is the data quality, as already mentioned before. So how do we improve that? The problem is often that it's not we as a federal government cannot act on it because it's at the cantonal level. So in the canton I'm living, I first would need to figure out who's the person I need to send the documents, then I need to figure out what documents to send them, and then I need to hope that the person actually updates the registry. I don't know how that person would do that. I'm mind-baffled that there's no online process within 2 clicks that I can tell them, look, I just installed a new heating source, or I did some energy efficiency work. So that needs to change, and the call is really to the banks that have local connections to the cantons, to the cantonal banks. Have the conversations with your governments, with your cantonal governments, and even sometimes municipal governments, and tell them that you need the data, you need it matters to you and to the transition which is endorsed by all the cantons. I think there needs to be a push on all levels that this data that there needs to be a process to improve that data. And the second call is actually to all the prospective founders that listened to John and are now considering a green fintech. I heavily support that, and I strongly agree with his intervention that innovation is absolutely key in this market. I would like to refer to all of those prospective founders to join the Green Fintech Network Association. We've launched that together with many green fintechs and key stakeholders, and it's an absolute phenomenal dynamic which is very supportive to all of your green fintechs, and it's especially important in this real estate business. And if I read my emails correctly this morning, there's a very big financial institution in Switzerland who will join it, which we can announce in the Green Fintech session in an hour. But maybe it's listed up here, I don't know.
Yeah.
And sorry,
I don't want to spoil it.
The third area, which is really important, is as well, again, to financial institutions. I think you really need to work on the models to make sure that transitional risks are really captured also in the real estate portfolios. There's a key risk in your portfolio, and I think we're only at the early stage to really model that risk correctly. So it's really important to work on that, to improve the visibility of that risk, of that systemic risk in the market. And that will obviously lead to you to have an internal incentive to also improve that portfolio and to engage with the clients.
So I think, again, it's a perfect segue to come to you, John. But in a minute, I would, if I may have one follow-up question. Tax incentives, is that also something you might want to comment?
I cannot comment that from the State Secretary of International Finance. Apologies for that. I'm sure there are ways of doing that. I'm not aware of any tax issue burden as you mentioned it, but again, they're a bit too far away.
Good. Now, John, we heard it's about data, it's about digital solution, innovation. I think also the white paper talks about the mega trends, digitization, but also climate change. You are addressing actually 2 of the 4 mega trends with your company called Norm. And I would ask you to provide us a bit of what is the real life problem that you want to solve and what is your solution. So if you can also pull up the slide there, maybe.
Sure. Happy to go into that. And if you read the UBS white paper, it's really good in how it lays out also how financial institutions here on the right can can really help this transition, also with incentives and products like green bonds, green loans, green mortgage-backed securities. But the issue we saw when we looked at the market is that there was no scalable enabling technology for that, because if you want to issue something like a green mortgage, you need the base that is like data-driven, and where you as a bank can decide like what is a good building and what is a bad building. And that's what we built with Norm. What you see here on the left side, we have a digital scalable process where the homeowner can add the data we need. Then we have a process where we calculate and verify everything so that at the end you have a nice performance certificate, but you also have, if you're not on the top category here, you also will have a full plan on how to retrofit your building, including how we would stage it, what the costs would be, what you get as subsidies, and that again is then a perfect link to the financial institution where you would go and talk to your financial advisor on how to realize the project. And we think this is a good example on how like startups can work together with financial institutions to really enable this transition, because in our view, if you really want to reach the goals, we need to have a bigger target group. At the moment, my feeling is we have the target group of the believers that really already believe that it's important. They will go and do the retrofitting by themselves, also if it's cumbersome and not a nice process. But I think in the next stage, we really need to also get to the ones that you have to motivate by financial incentives or to show them that their building has a higher valuation in future, or even that like there will be regulations that will make it harder to sell in future if you don't do this. And for this, I think such incentives that leading banks now start to provide their clients will be really important to also get that target group to think about retrofitting. And maybe to wrap this part up on innovation, Kirsten, also, where do you see the role of innovation, given also your expertise in advising clients?
I think, you know, we've talked about innovation in data, we've talked about innovation in lending, we touched yesterday, I think, on innovation in insurance as well, which is absolutely fundamental. There's interesting innovation, if you guys have come across Octopus Energy, in energy providers. So we've recently completed 10 homes with a pretty ambitious developer. And by ensuring that the energy performance of those homes, the design of those homes is energy efficient, there is battery storage, there's thermal storage, it's air source heat pump, there's some PV panels, etc. The homeowner that buys that home is guaranteed not to pay an energy bill for 5 years. And that's a guarantee from the energy provider. And to me, that's quite an incredible incentive. And again, you know, is it driving the market? Am I going to buy that home where I know, regardless of what energy prices do, I'm guaranteed not to pay an energy bill for 5 years? Or am I going to pay the one across the road where it might be an A, it might be a C, it might be a B, it might bear no resemblance to actually the energy performance of that building? So I think those sorts of innovations are really interesting as well. Also, the sort of physical product innovations. You mentioned that 28% of carbon is associated with the energy consumed in our building, so whether that's the gas, the fossil fuels, or the electricity. But 10% of global CO2 emissions are associated with construction products as well. And I think that needs tackling. Concrete and steel are, the cement component anyway, of concrete and steel are two of the highest. We talk about moving towards the circular economy, and people sort of say, well, I'll get recycled steel. The fact is we still consume too much. You know, there's only 30% scrap steel to meet our steel demand, so we do need innovation in new steel production, or we need to start looking at alternative building materials. We need to start looking at sustainable timber and how do we manage forestry to ensure, how do we manage insurance to ensure that we can build with some of these more sustainable building materials. We're seeing I think we need more innovation in these sort of circular economy approaches. So things like waste plastics into new construction products. There's some really interesting movement there, particularly in developing nations, I find, because they don't have waste management infrastructure like we do across Europe. But also in France, I know there's somebody producing aggregates from waste municipal plastics. And of course, mushrooms will save the world, which is quite exciting. So there's incredible investment and excitement over mycelium and what it can do. Insulation products, we're looking at remediation of land with mycelium, and I think we're only just starting to really explore these nature-based solutions and really understanding biomimicry and what that means for us in terms of transitioning to a low-carbon economy and what that looks like in terms of new construction products. Hemp is another one that's growing in excitement. It's a fast-growing, high-carbon sequestering building material that has phenomenal properties around insulation and soundproofing, etc. And that's where I think we need more investment and more innovation moving forward.
Thanks, Kirsten. And I guess we can continue for hours there and also talk about cities and how the layout of cities might change. But at this point, what we wanted to do is also to open up the Q&A, and if there are any questions in the room, if you might raise your hand, we will bring you a mic. There's one question in the back there. Another one here, there. I don't have a pencil like Nick had yesterday, so I hope you can still remember. Oh, in the very back.
Yes, in the very back. Hello, I'm Chiara Rinaldi. I'm the co-founder of Sustain Account, who is also a member of the Green FinTech Network. Thanks for mentioning it, Christoph. Two questions, remarks. First is, what about stopping paying a premium for sustainability and instead making externalities included in the price of carbon and so on? So this is always a debate about who should carry the cost of the change and transformation. And second, if we think about buildings, well, buildings will be there for the next 30, 40, 50 years, hopefully. We want to build for a long term. And we want to refurbish them. We want to take into account, of course, lowering carbon emissions. But what about preparing them for the inevitable changes that climate change is bringing? So the increased storms and other extreme weather events, it's an opportunity right now to take them into account when we do the refurbishments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these two questions. I guess, Christoph, the first question, you might want to give it a go.
Thank you very much. So it's always I'm always happy to be able to quote the former Secretary General of the OECD by saying we need a big fat price on carbon. So fully agree with that. We need to find ways to internalize that. In Switzerland, we have a price of 120 Swiss francs or dollars on heating fuel. We tried to increase that, but got shut down at the popular vote in 2021 with the CO2 law. We also have the 100 highest emitters are part of the emission trading system that's linked to the EU, which pay roughly a price of, I don't know what the latest price, around 90, 100 euros per ton. So it's kind of okay what's happening domestically in Switzerland. It's kind of okay what's happening from a price perspective in the European Union. There is obviously carbon leakage, which will be addressed by the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism by the EU, which will cover the sources or the resources needed for building, so especially cement and steel are included there. So that's encouraging to see how the EU is addressing that. We need it on a global level to fight climate change. There, that's just not realistic. So I always give the example of the OECD trying to build an inclusive framework on carbon prices. So to really get a large group of countries together to include that carbon price, and it got watered down by many, many countries, and now the current name is Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches. So we are not even allowed to say carbon prices. So it's a difficult case. I wouldn't be too hopeful that we end up with one global carbon price, but I think it's already very encouraging that regions are implementing carbon price. Even China is implementing a carbon price, albeit a small one.
I don't know, anyone want to react on the second part of the question, maybe?
I'm happy to pick up on the climate adaptability aspect. So I think the biggest challenge facing a lot of Europe is actually going to be the overheating issue. We're building homes now that actually are based on climate data now. We do all of our energy modeling and our performance modeling on climate data now. What we need to do is start introducing what happens, what does the climate look like in 20 years, and how does that building now perform? Worryingly, I guess in the UK, we've seen Part O, which is our overheating regulations, being updated, which you would think is great. But unfortunately, we've been working, again, with new housing, and however hard we push, and believe me, I live, breathe, and love sustainability, right? I love design. We're working with some of the best specialists, and we can't get these new homes to pass Part O with intelligent things like blinds, like shading, like reducing the size of windows on south-facing walls and increasing them on north, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, that new regulation may well push a less ambitious homeowner to just put in air conditioning, because that's how you prevent overheating. And so we're in a situation where new regulation, which is in theory been put in place for climate adaptability, is actually going to exacerbate the problem. And we need a little bit more thought about the interconnectivity of these regulations and of the analysis that is going forward. But I absolutely agree. We do start to think about now around climate adaptability and flood risk, etc. It is coming into building design.
And maybe if we can move to the next question. And can I ask you, please, just one question, because it makes it much easier to answer.
Okay, thanks a lot. One question. Christian Frutiger from the Swiss Development Agency. Alfred, you were alluding to real-life problems. I'll give you a giant one from the Global South, for a lack of a better word. The Global South is urbanizing disproportionately faster than the Global North. So we have to build right from the beginning. It's not about retrofitting. The question is, how do we finance it? There are some solutions, like sustainable building codes, which we're working on with partner countries, with actually natural cooling right from the beginning, or low-carbon cement developed here at EPFL and with a number of research institutes in Asia and Latin America that emits 40% less carbon. So there are some solutions, but still, how do we finance the rapidly progressing urbanization so we build right in the Global South? We may not be able to solve this here, right now, but looking forward to some of your ideas.
But maybe just to understand a bit, really the real-life issue that you're describing. So is there a lack of financing or the lack of right financing? So, because it seems like when you talk about urbanization, financing is there.
Financing is there, but it's the lack of right financing producing the right results.
Yep.
In order for those countries not to have to make the same mistakes as we did, because we cannot afford retrofitting. We have to build right from the beginning, for all of us.
Can I just add one comment and fully agree, obviously, to what Ambassador Frutiger is saying. You can even single it down to India. The quality of cement and the quality of steel India will use over the next decades in their urbanization will determine if we hit the 1.5 or 2 degree warming scenario or not. And there's some encouraging technology on green steel, but it's then made for the industrialized market. So then they want to obviously reap the benefits of, the company wants to reap the benefits of that new invention, which is understandable as well. But we need it now at scale in India and in many other places as well. So that's certainly a big challenge I don't have a solution for. So.
Yeah, other panelists?
I can talk about concrete, but I can't talk about finance, so.
So there's another question there. Yep.
Hello, Maria Finders from Luma. We started a design lab, which is bioregional design lab in the south of France, in Arles, about 7 years ago. And we started developing building materials from farm to building. So this whole kind of circular economy that comes to base in what a bioregion can be, because we can't move buildings around. Buildings are very grounded. I have a question for you, Kirsten. What are we doing about education in these new fields for architects? Because we find that the biggest block are architects. They don't like the aesthetic. They don't understand how to work with straw. And they just want to keep buildings with glass and concrete. So what are you guys doing?
I agree with you. One of the biggest challenges we have is architects and engineers, and the education needs to change. As I say, myself, my design director, who's a qualified architect, we do go out, we teach at various universities. We do what we can to really challenge and engage, because the other problem is usually architects are taught to design from a blank piece of paper. The refurbishment is incredibly challenged from an architectural perspective, and they're not taught that at university. They're not taught necessarily to have, here's an existing building. We are working with Manchester Metropolitan University. They are challenging their architects, their young architects. They're saying, right, we're going to visit this old baths. It needs to be housing. How are we going to do it? And having that education piece. As I mentioned in earlier in the discussion as well, the role of the institutions, the structure of the Institution of Structural Engineers, Civil Engineers, the Royal Institution of British Architects, all of these have a real, I think, a real part to play in making sure that you cannot become a qualified architect or engineer until you demonstrate that you are able to think differently, do differently. It has to be a core part of not just the basic education at university, but actually the ongoing professional development and the qualifications that we're seeing for those professions. In terms of creating change, I hear you. Sustainable products are ugly. I don't want to use them. I had the same challenge when we built the London Olympic Park many, many years ago, when we had salvaged and reclaimed products. Simply actually taking the architects out and showing them the quality of those products shifted the thinking. The problem is that these more sustainable or reclaimed products don't have the glossy brochures associated with them. They're not being shown in their sort of final form, if you like. And again, that's a moment of sort of perspective and engagement with architects to sort of say, this is a different product, this is a different material. Be inspired by it, not constrained by it.
I would like to add something. Have a little faith into the next generation of architects. I do some teaching too from time to time at the ETH, where I was trained as an architect too. And if you give them students now the task to tear down a building and build something new, they will protest. They will protest because they don't want to tear down any buildings anymore. So there's a new thinking also in the schools, I think.
You're ahead of us in the UK then.
There's another question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot to all panelists for the very insightful inputs. I'm Misha Schliman, I'm a researcher at ETH, and I'm interested in decarbonizing mortgage portfolios. And we talked about impact, and what impact finance can have, and we talked about financial incentives. But I think it's fair to acknowledge that, for example, green mortgage products have been around for 25 years. For example, ZKB did that since the 90s. And banks have other instruments. They can put requirements and conditions on granting mortgage loans, such as, for example, just requiring homeowners to replace their heating system with renewable heating systems once they have to replace their heating systems anyway. And for example, in the Swiss context, that would already be a leapfrog compared to what we have as the current situation. And my question to the panel would be, do you think that we're going to see that from the finance sector soon? And if not, what does currently prevent that from happening?
So maybe to add, because I had various good discussions with banks on why their green mortgages are not taking off as they should be. And one of the learnings that I heard is that in this low interest environment that we lived for the last 10 years, people didn't really do a beauty contest on the cost. It was basically a free mortgage for 0.8, 0.9% yield. Then you didn't care if you paid 0.05% less or more. That wasn't a deciding factor. I think that in itself now changes. Now that the mortgage rates are very high, the banks have much more leeway to give an actual rebate or an actual tangible rebate, and people are really struggling with financing their mortgage. So I think now I would expect it to take off a bit more. The other thing which I believe is a huge game changer over the next years globally is the best practice on transition plans. I think transition plans for the financial industry will become mandatory in many, many jurisdictions. In countries such as UK and Switzerland, they are already mandatory. In Switzerland with the CO2 ordinance, the TCFD, the climate ordinance, the TCFD ordinance, so to say, which comes into effect as of next year. There needs to be transition plans with scope 1 to scope 3. And part of these transition plans are mortgages. So it's on a very high level. So the question of what is a best practice transition plan, how to deal with the mortgages, this is an emerging field where in the next 2 or 3 years there will be an international best practice, maybe or probably set by the transition plan task force in the UK.
Maybe a point to add here is that there are a lot of green mortgages around, but if you look in detail at them, most are just like a marketing product and not a real product. So if you go in and negotiate a bit, you get the same rate as you would get for the green mortgage. And I think there it's really where things need to change. So if a bank offers a green mortgage, it should really be an incentive, and it should change if I go in with a good building or not. And I think there maybe it was also a bit diluted in the history, this whole term, but I think that needs to change. And then maybe an idea also would be to have an internal price for carbon also inside such institutions as a bank, because now if you have to go and compare, should I do this business case or not, and here I lose a bit of money but I would gain a lot of not emitted CO2, that business case is really hard to calculate because there is no price for that ton of CO2, and there is where I think that would also enable more of such use cases.
And maybe if I can also comment on this, because I'm a passionate product manager actually in the mortgage field. So, the green mortgage is actually financing a property which is already green. That is not what brings us down, right? So what we need to finance is actually the retrofitting, the renovation. So having a building which is whatever, DE or how you call it, or red, and you need to bring it down to a different shade of color or to an A rating. That's where you can really have the impact also from a decarbonization on your own portfolio. Because again, financing just a green property doesn't give you any improvement in your decarbonization roadmap. So I think that's where we really need to focus as product managers, as banks, to advise clients on their renovation path. And that's exactly where we need this kind of data, because yes, the client might do some first steps in isolation, in heating, etc. Will it already bring him all the way to an official green certification like we have in Switzerland with the GEAC? Maybe yes, maybe no, but still it's the right direction, and we need to incentivize that. And just a last comment on that, we had an offering, and our learning was we wanted, in that negative interest environment, we wanted to offer basically money for free if you change from fossil to non-fossil heating. The experience that we had was basically those clients who were already in the project were taking that. The clients that were trying to start a new project were given the answer of their plumbers, basically, come back in 2 years' time. So it's not just the financial institutions that need to move, it's also about the capacity that is there in the building industry.
Thanks a lot for the inputs. Maybe sorry for circling back again. I see capacity restrictions, I see internalizing, transition risk, physical risk into mortgage pricing, but why don't just make it simple? We don't finance any more buildings that build in new fossil heating systems. That's a lock-in for 25 years. That's gonna bring us way beyond the current budget that we have. I think that's not anymore considered best practice, that's just the bare minimum that we have to do. Why don't we see it, banks picking up on that and making that just a hard condition in new mortgage contracts?
Well, we can have that debate maybe later on as well, but just it's not only about decarbonization, it's also about ESG. So take UBS, we are 25% of the market. What would happen if we exit according to your scenario? But I leave it there, and I really want to wrap up this session now. First of all, I think it was a very good discussion, but I want to also end on a bit of a more positive note, maybe, and do it by a trick. Fast forwarding 10 years, looking back to today, in one maybe sentence or word, what was the biggest catalyst for change and improved retrofitting in the building sector? So maybe if I start with you, John, or...
My hope would be that we say carbon pricing, external and company internal. If I would have to bet money, I would probably say the Ukraine war.
Not such a positive note, though, but Niklas?
Yeah, I would put my money on everything about digitization. I think we know not enough about our buildings. We especially do not know what they are consuming. And everything that helps us to know that, like in a car where you know at every time when you're driving it how much fuel or whatever you are consuming at the moment, if we have that for buildings, it will help us a lot to be more efficient.
Kirsten?
I guess picking up on that, I'd like to look back in 10 years' time and say that lack of data was no excuse for inaction.
Mandatory transition plans, although I want to have a conversation on shadow pricing.
So with that, let's hope that everything will come, except for you, John, with your last vote. Let's hope that this will not continue. But at this point, I really want to thank all the panelists here up on stage. Maybe you also share with me a big round of applause here. And as I said in the beginning, we just launched today the UBS whitepaper, and you can find the QR code to download it on our ubs.com website. And with that, I want to thank you all for your participation, for the questions, and wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you.